Hey guys, it's Rocker here, and I am here today to show you the basic rotation for Dragonhunter. So, after the last video I uploaded of the Renegade spec, I actually got a bunch of good feedback for it, and it seemed like it was helpful to a lot of people, so I thought, why not just do this for a bunch of DPS classes that I play, just to give people like something to help them practice rotation and to get into a class, right? Because you see a lot of people like kind of like messing up basic rotation stuff, and maybe some kind of explanation of what to look out for is helpful, right? So I'm thinking about actually doing this for more classes, but yeah, keep in mind again, guys, this is a basic rotation guide, so the aim of this is to get people to understand the basic principle of the rotation, right? This is hopefully somewhat independent of meta in a way, right? Because it's more about the base idea of how to play the class. So even if like, I don't know, even if like some values get changed on this, the base idea of this class is probably going to kinda remain the same. At least Dragonhunter has been kinda the same for a while, but yeah, we'll see, right? If there is a balance patch, I'll make sure to put that into the video description, right? So yeah, for Dragonhunter, it's kind of important to know all your modifiers. Dragonhunter is one of the burstiest classes in Guild Wars 2 when it comes to DPS. You have an incredibly high initial damage spike, and then you kind of fall off a little bit over time, right? So you can... this is why this is such a great class for fractals, for raid bosses that have short DPS phases. This is why a lot of record runs will use this for split phases, for example, because then you often have to like face enemies with like a lower health pool that you can burst down quickly. So Dragonhunter is great for that. Probably the best class for that currently in the current meta. So yeah, really what you have to nail on Dragonhunter is that initial burst. You have to understand what do you do to set up your burst, and then you kind of have like down phases where you just kind of try to fill the time most efficiently. So I'm going to quickly run you through the modifiers that we have, because that is a very important part to the class, is basically stacking your damage modifiers. Modifiers meaning traits or skills, etc., that will, for a limited time, if you do something or if you have a certain buff or if a certain requirement is met, basically you get a percentage DPS increase, right? And for Dragonhunter you have quite a few of these, so it's quite important to understand what you have to keep in mind to maximize your DPS. The first one, and probably most important one, is that you need to have retaliation. This build is very dependent on having retaliation. That's because of your radiance traits. First of all, here you have a trait that grants you 10% damage and ferocity when you have retaliation, right? So you always want to have retaliation on this, because 10% damage, 200 ferocity, 250, that's huge, right? That's very big. So you always want to have this. Now you're always going to have this if you have a chrono or multiple Dragonhunters, okay? Then you kind of don't even have to think about it too much anymore, because you do have a skill that gives you retail. I'm just going to quickly tell you about another trait before I show you that. The second trait that you have is when you have retaliation, you have increased chance to critically strike, okay? And look at this, it's a 50% crit chance increase, and that is... I don't think I even need to tell you this. This is a huge increase, obviously. 50% crit chance is absolutely massive. So you always want to have this, right? You can change this out in some rare occasions, okay? But for now, you really do want this. If I look at my equipment, I'm full Berserker. I use Scholar Runes, Force Impact on both of the weapons. Everything's Berserker, and look at this, I'm at slightly higher than 50% crit chance, right? And I don't even have Fury, I don't even have Spotter, etc. Even if I have 0 buffs, as long as I have Retail, you're capped on crit. This is why you never need to be in the Spotter group on Dragonhunter. That's why if you don't run a Druid, or if you maybe only run one Druid in a raid comp and your second sub-squad has, I don't know, maybe a heal ally or something, you can easily go into the heal allies group. You don't need the precision buff that a Druid usually gives you, right? So that kind of frees you up much more for team comps, and it's kind of nice. So, yeah, retail, first big thing. How do you get retail? Basically, there is a skill on your greatsword. It's the 4 skill right here. It's basically every weapon set on Dragonhunter has at least one symbol skill, and this one's gonna be important later as well, right? And the symbol basically is some skill that leaves this mark on the ground, right? And this symbol will buff you depending on what weapon you're using, and the greatsword symbol, that one will give you retail. And basically, if you give yourself retail and then your chronos start using the signets of inspiration, you're going to have a lot of retail. And if you have multiple Dragon Hunters, then you're going to have multiple symbols of wrath. Wrath, am I saying it right? Yeah, symbols of wrath. And then you will get more retail as well, right? So stacking Dragon Hunters, if you run something other than chrono, is definitely decent for this, right? For the rotations on the golem, you don't really have to worry about this because you're going to give yourself retail anyway on the console, right? And most groups run with chronos anyway, so you don't really have to worry about having retail. So kind of edge cases where you have to actually worry about your retail uptime. So your other another big modifier is this one, Symbolic Avenger. This trait does that you get a 10% damage increase when you have a symbol under your enemy. Okay, this is important. It has to be under your enemy, not under you. Okay, a lot of people mix this up. So as long as there's a symbol under your enemy, you're going to deal 10% more damage. Keep that in mind, right? So we can already see what are things that we want to look out for when playing Dragonhunter. We want to have retail. We want to have symbols under our enemy as much as possible. Or at least you want to have a symbol under your enemy during your initial burst. During your big bursts, right? You always want to have this modifier there. And it's all gonna make sense later, right? And then your last big modifier is striking an enemy tethered by your Spear of Justice inflicts vulnerability and increases damage dealt. This is a 20% damage modifier whenever you're tethered to an enemy with Spear of Justice. I'm gonna quickly demonstrate this maybe. Just like some random golem. Spawn this. See, I use F1 on him. Now you never want to reactivate this because as long as this is up, you deal 20% more damage to that foe, okay? So yeah, and I guess we can already kind of see what we want to look out for now, right? We want to always have a symbol under the enemy, we want to have retaliation, and we want to be tethered to the enemy with F1. And F1 has a somewhat high cooldown, right? So you can see the burst is going to be while you're tethered with F1, right? You want to fit as many skills, as much DPS into the time frame where you're tethered to the enemy with the Spear of Justice. And then of course you also want to have a symbol under the enemy at that point, right? Because that's another 10%. So let's just quickly buff ourselves. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly do the opening burst rotation. If you know how to do a decent opening burst, you're 70% there. Okay, that like opening burst is, as long as you can do this, half of the fractal bosses will face after this. Lots of raid bosses, like as long as you know how to do the burst, that's the important part about Dragonhunter, really. So I'm going to spawn a golem. I'm just going to go with twice the average hitbox, 4 million health, and we of course want the conditions on this as well. Okay, so for utility skills, you bring Procession of Blades. That's a trap, right? That is one of your Dragonhunter traps. You run Sword of Justice. This is a DPS utility for yourself, right? You can exchange this based on the situation, right? Sometimes in fractals, you want to bring a reflect, maybe. Maybe you want a Wall of Reflection. Maybe you want stability and you want to stand your ground, right? This might be valuable for Slothosaur, for example. A lot of people use this for Slothosaur. So this one is somewhat interchangeable since it's like the lowest DPS increase on your utility skill bar, but unless you really need it for something else, just run Sword of Justice. It's your DPS increase utility skill, right? So now, kind of just look closely. The initial burst is really just me using all of my skills. I'm going to precast the trap because that one takes a second to trigger and then it's going to deal some damage over time. And then I'm going to tether myself with the F1 and I'm going to bust out as many skills as I can, okay? Yeah, let's go. And keep an eye on the DPS meter, on how I'm spiking. Like, you spike up to 50k, I didn't even use my elite there correctly. So you spike up to 50k on the initial opening, and this was really, I mean, and this is not even terribly hard, right? This is just the first 5 seconds of your rotation, basically, right? You just put down your trap, proc F1, we're going to use the symbol, because keep in mind, right, the symbol gives us a 10% DPS increase. It's also going to give you retail when you're in, when you're not in a training golem situation, right? And then you use your Greatsword 2, that's your big burst skill on Greatsword. You're going to use your Scepter 2 and your Focus 4, and you're trying to fit 2 Swords of Justice in there and an Elite Trap, right? If you can do this, this takes a bit of practice. You've got to be pretty quick on your toes here to fit in 2 Swords of Justice and the Elite and all your weapon skills before the F1 runs out. But if you can do this, you can reach some really, really sick burst numbers, right? So let's just do this again. So this was better, see, and now the F1 runs out and we spiked over 50k, okay? Like, if you keep an eye on the DPS meter up here. And now it's basically, the rest of the rotation is basically how do I repeat this and fill the gaps in between F1s as efficiently as possible. Okay, maybe let's take one quick step back, okay? For your weapon skills, the important skills on your weapons that you want to use, okay, are your 2 skill. Those are your big burst skills, okay? It's just to understand which skills are priority to fit into your F1 frames, right? Which skills are priority to fit into your bursty phases. Like, you gotta understand that you have the whole principle of Dragonhunter, right, is that you have really high burst, you have a low phase, and then you have really high burst again. So you try to find the high priority skills that are going to make the most use of that damage modifier you get from being tethered to the enemy. And number 1 of that is definitely your Greatsword 2, right? It hits 7 times, if you look at the tooltip, 6k damage every time. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind about Greatsword 2 is, look at how it works, right? You go full Beyblade, and you throw these projectiles out, right? So it's not that you hit your enemy 7 times if you stand next to him. It's that it throws out 7 projectiles that each deal these damage, right? So I'm going to respawn my golem here real quick to demonstrate this. If I look at the red line, this is the hitbox of the enemy. If you stand next to him like this, you can see I get a few DPS numbers, right? But I also had a lot of these projectiles just fly away because, well, they just fly around me in a circle, right? It's not guaranteed that they will all hit the enemy. However, if you stand inside the enemy's hitbox, now they all hit him, right? Because you're inside the enemy, therefore he face tanks every single projectile. So it's very important on Dragonhunter to stand inside the hitbox, and that has to do with another skill as well, actually, this 5 skill here. That one is a pretty interesting one as well. We might be going a little bit into detail here already, right? But what this skill does is basically it will throw out projectiles as well to surrounding enemies. So it will throw this projectile, and then you could reactivate it to pull this enemy to you. This guy has a break bar, so he's not going to get pulled, but normal trash mobs would get pulled to you with this skill. These projectiles only proc if there are actual enemies around, right? See, there's only one enemy close to me, so I only throw 1 projectile whenever I use it. If you have multiple enemies around you, it would throw out multiple projectiles. And again, this skill, just like Greatsword 2, these projectiles get absorbed by the target if you stand inside the hitbox. So, if I'm standing inside of the hitbox of the enemy, and let's just imagine there are like 5 enemies around this maybe, then if you use the Greatsword 5 skill, it's going to it's going to attempt to throw a projectile at every single enemy out here. Not every single one, right? Of course it has a target cap of 5 targets, but a maximum of 5 projectiles each projectile hitting pretty hard, right? If you look at this, this was like an 11k hit. And if you have 5 targets out here, then it's going to throw 5 projectiles. All 5 projectiles are going to hit the enemy if you stand inside the hitbox. So you basically just bust out a 50k hit with like one cast, right? So it's actually a very, very strong skill, but it's dependent on your environment and on the surroundings of the boss. Okay, so that much for Greatsword. So we can see we have the symbol here for the modifier, Greatsword 2 for Big Burst, 5 skill for Big Burst when you have other targets around you, right? This could, I mean, to just give some examples, this will proc on Veil Guardian Seekers. This will proc on Slublings on Slothosaur. This will proc on the summoned mini ghosts on Gorzaval, right? All of these adds will make this skill stronger, basically. So on your other weapons set, you have, first of all, your Scepter 2 skill. This is your main Scepter skill. This has a fairly low cooldown, this is a symbol, and this keeps doing damage, right? You see these little spectral hammers beating down on the enemy, right? So this is not only good damage, it's also a symbol. So this will keep up, because it's rather low cooldown. See, you can get a pretty good uptime of symbols with just this skill. See, like this is probably like a 75 to 80% uptime of having a symbol under your enemy. And then you, of course, you have your focus 4 and 5 skills. These, not really too much to say about these. This is basically just a strong DPS skill, hits your enemies 9 times with pretty good damage. This does also block things, so like for example I use this on Veil Guardian to block blues every now and then. However, if you don't block attacks, basically this will give you 3 stacks. Each stack will block 1 attack. And if you don't proc all of these blocks, the shield will explode and deal damage, right? So you can use this defensively. If you don't need it defensively, you use it offensively, right? Like for max DPS purposes, you'd want to use this offensively and try to avoid getting hit. But it's good to know that this is a very, very strong defensive skill. This can really save your ass sometimes. To remember, burst skills on Scepter Focus, basically 2 and 4, and also your 5, right? Your 3 skill doesn't really matter, you're better off just auto-attacking. So, to sum this up, burst skills, Greatsword 2, Scepter 2, Focus 4, main burst skills, right? These are the ones you always want to fit into the F1. Of course, you also want to fit in your utility skills, you want to fit in your Sword of Justice, and you want to fit in your Procession of Blades. Now, this is, when you practice the rotation, I always find it good to find something that you can kind of use as your anchor, right? Something that you can, a cooldown that you can look at, that you can basically build the rotation on. And the first step to this on Dragonhunter is that you will always cast Procession of Blades and then F1, because the cooldowns are exactly the same, and if you always do this, you can always line up your burst with this, because this is probably also one of your biggest burst skills. So lining these up will basically initiate your burst every single time, right? I'm going to respawn this golem here. You saw I started with this skill. This is always the skill that starts your burst rotation, okay? Procession of Blades, F1, then symbol 2, weapon swap, your other burst skills, and bam, there's your opening burst, right? And this is going to continue, right? This is going to continue. Now, if I continue on with the rotation, you then keep using your symbol. I think I actually have to restart this because I had a break in there. Let's just respawn the golem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my opening burst now. Procession of Blades F1, symbol for the buff, Greatsword 2, weapon swap, 2, 4, 5. And what you can actually do on the golem is you can precast your 5 skill. Like if I just use this now and weapon swap before I get into combat, then this shield is still on me, right? This is still going to explode and deal damage. It's kind of a golem thing, though. You don't really do this often in actual raid, so if you're practicing this, don't waste too much time on this. But if you aim for top numbers, then this is, of course, something you should do on the golem as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start Procession of Plates F1, Symbol, Greatsword 2. Make sure to fully channel this. Don't interrupt this skill, right? This is your big burst skill. You don't want to interrupt this halfway through. Swap to the other weapon set. I'm going to use my 2, 4, 5 Sword of Justice, Trap, Sword of Justice, okay? You kind of try to just squeeze these in here, okay? After this, these two are going to be on cooldown, right? These have long cooldowns. This one has a short cooldown. Your F1 is going to unproc, right? So you're just going to like kind of keep using your 2s and auto attack on Scepter. Your Scepter auto attack is really good, by the way. This is also a big strength of Dragonhunter, is that you can actually like kind of go range with Scepter auto attacks and still deal some decent damage. Even if you just use your like 2 and auto attacks, you're still going to pull some DPS, right? So if you have to go save sometimes, maybe you're doing Doom CM or something, the Endless Echo is running by you, you need to like take a step back. This is like kind of a safe way, but of course this is not nearly as bursty as the other ones, right? Like I'm on 20k DPS roughly, it's pretty low. But it's good to keep in mind. So this is what we're going to do while we're covering time, right? While we're waiting for the F1 to come back up, we're just going to use Scepter auto attacks and 2, and then if you're really fast, you can actually swap back to Greatsword and use your 5 skill and your 3 skill before your trap comes back up. And then you can actually use your trap again. We're going to re-initiate the next big burst, basically, by using trap F1, 4, 2, right? So, I hope that was understandable. So yeah, I'm just going to do it now, and you guys can keep an eye on it, right? And I'm just going to shut up and show you real quick. So see, I'm just auto-attacking and this. Now 5-3, and now it fits perfectly with my F1 and trap coming back up, right? Now you just auto-attack, you use your 3 again and another Greatsword 2. And then you swap your weapons, and now you're not going to immediately use your 4 skill. You're actually going to wait until this comes back up. And now you're using your 4 and 5, so you get them into the modifier, right? We basically do the same rotation, but the other way around now. Because obviously it's not always going to be, it's not always going to exactly pan out, right? You're not always going to start your burst on Greatsword. Your rotation is going to shift a little bit, right? So the first F1 you get off with your Greatsword opening burst, right? And the second F1, you're actually again going to be able to get off while you're on your Greatsword, right? As you saw, it fits so perfectly, actually. It's so nice. You use your Symbol of Punishment one last time, swap weapons, you use your 5 and 3, and then your Procession of Plates is back up, and your F1, right? Since they share pretty much the same cooldown. If you're fast enough, you're going to go back to Greatsword, 5-3, Procession of Plates F1, Symbol, and 2, and then you just basically auto attack, right? Make sure to always finish your auto attack chains. If you look closely at the tooltip, you can see the third auto attack does a lot more damage than the first 2 auto attacks. So you always want to like get the auto attack chains finished, right? But that's something pretty advanced. You don't really have to care about that immediately, but yeah, later down the line, that's something you want to look out for. So let's do this again, right? Let's just do this again. You can actually see I use my Sword of Justice before I use my 4 and 5, just so I can make sure to get 2 of them in. And one last Symbol, weapon swap 5-3, and trap comes back up F1, 4-2. Actually, you should hold on to these Swords of Justice. You shouldn't. Alright, I'm gonna talk about that in just a minute again. We swap here. Don't use your 4 skill yet. Hold on to that one. Use your Symbol one last time, and now we start our burst again. And see, and it fits perfectly. You fit in your Greatsword 2 just perfectly. And now instead of doing auto attacks, you could do the 3 and 5 again. The 3 and 5 really, when it comes to Golem rotation, that is something. First you need to get down the basic rhythm. You need to get the, like, I like to compare rotations to songs, and songs always have a bass line and then they have a melody line, right? the first thing you need to get right is the bass line. You need to get because the bass line sets the rhythm, and then you can play the melody on top of that, right? But if the rhythm is wrong, your melody is always gonna be trash. So make sure to practice your rhythm before you practice your melody, right? As a house needs a strong foundation, right? That's what you could say. And the rhythm really is procession of plates in F1, timing this, right? And then like the 3 skill, the 5 skill, those are kind of by work. These also kind of change depending on situation, right? For example, on a Veil Guardian, you'd want to hang on to your 5 skill until the Seekers are actually in range, right? If you use it while the Seekers are all the way like on the other side of the map, you wouldn't get any use out of this, right? Or like you wouldn't get as much use out of it. So yeah, try to get this rotation right? Try to get the bursting right, try to line up your skills with the F1. And I'm just going to do one, hopefully full set of a rotation now. I'm hoping to get one entire rotation down, right? So yeah, enjoy. I'm going to put some music under this. Enjoy the rotation. So yeah, not a perfectly clean rotation, but I hope it did the job and showed you what to look out for, right? If you're practicing this, what you can do is you can give yourself all of the buffs and you can play this without buff food, right? I still had this running from a raid I was in before this, but you can do this completely without buff food. And then a number that you could aim for is, let me just quickly look this up maybe. If you have a full ascended set with infusions, then you can actually, without buff food, right? I'm using buff food now, so I had higher numbers. You can reach about 35k is kind of a number that you could aim for. If you don't have infusions, retract like take like 2% off of that, 2 to 3%. If you have exotics gear, then of course also do the math, right? And then take another, like, depending on what kind of gear you have, like 10 to 15% DPS off of that, right? Depending on your gear. So, but that is a nice number to look out for, and you don't have to waste your buff food while you practice the rotation. One thing that you might have seen, that you might have noticed, is it actually took quite a few cycles to basically get to an entire loop of the rotation, right? How do I even explain this? Where do I start, right? So like a rotation always kind of falls into loops, right? And to go a full loop, you might have to go further than just one weapon swap, right? The rotation isn't always the same when you're on Greatsword. You could, I mean, really, if you're having trouble with this, what you could do is you could always try to just line up the opening burst again, and just get to that point where your weapon swap is up and like delay, but you're going to lose a bunch of DPS that way. So, really, when does the rotation loop? I think it's on like the 4th weapon swap, was it? I'm going to do this and try to talk while I do it now. I hope I don't get... Yeah, it's a little bit awkward to do a rotation and talk over it with commentary. So obviously this is the opening again. Seen that one many times by now. Use your 2 off cooldown, make sure to not delay that. 3, 5, trap F1. Now you do, I think, 2 auto tech chain, 3 auto tech chains in here. And now you just swap here, you use your symbol immediately. And you can see we're still not fully looped, right? Now we started the burst on the other weapon set, so this is like a second kind of burst in a way, the second way to do the burst, to line up your skills. And now we're actually going to spend some more time on Greatsword, and now this is actually where the rotation loops, right? This is basically your opening rotation again. So you are, this is I think your 4th time that you are on Greatsword. You actually stay on Greatsword for a bit, so that you can line up your burst with F1 again, right? So you're basically staying here, even though your weapon swap might be up for a little bit, you're going to stay on Greatsword until your Procession of Blades and F1 comes up, so that you can basically restart the rotation. You see, this is about halfway of the Golem, right? So this is... it's a fairly long rotation, really. It's actually a fairly long rotation at this point. Dragonhunter used to be a very simple class, really. It used to be considered one of the most simple classes. It's gotten a lot of complexity recently. So yeah, I'm not sure what else really to tell you. I mean, at this point you can watch a rotation video as well. Make sure to, if you want to see the exact rotation, go visit snowcross.com. They have a great guide section for Dragonhunter, and they have a written out rotation guide there. This served the purpose to show you basically how to learn the rhythm of the rotation, what to look out for, how do you line up your modifiers to make sure that your burst is on point. And keep in mind, most boss phases are basically done before the rotation has fully looped. If your group has good DPS, on fractals you rarely, if you have good DPS, you rarely even get through a full loop, right? It's so important to get your opening burst right. If you're with a somewhat decent group in fractals that has good DPS, you're going to do this opening burst, and if you do it right, you're going to do this once and the boss is going to be faced, you're going to be doing something else for a while, right? For raids, of course, you have to kind of know how to go on afterwards, but really, most bosses will face before you get a full loop down. And that is kind of the beauty of Dragonhunter, is as soon as you get the burst, as soon as you understand how to do the full burst, you're halfway there. One more little thing, maybe one little neat, very advanced trick that you can do is you can actually use weapon stow to increase your DPS. So if you go to options, in control options, you can, where is it? It's down here in miscellaneous. You can stow or draw a weapon. And see, I've put this, I've triggered this. This is actually put on a mouse button of mine, so I can easily reach it, right? So I can draw and stow my weapon, and what you can do is you can interrupt after casts with this. And there's one skill in particular where you can use this on Dragonhunter, and that is your Greatsword 4 skill. See, if I use this, it actually has a fairly long cast, or rather, the initial cast is actually super slow, but the animation, after the skill effect is already there, your character is still in an animation, right? He's still like awkwardly pulling out this sword and like pushing it into the ground, right? And you can actually interrupt this with weapon stowing, right? I can use this and I can instantly stow my weapon. If I didn't do this, let's look at how it looks when I don't do it and how it looks when I do it, right? This is me using 4 and then Greatsword 2 without stowing my weapon. See how it took him a while to draw the weapon out despite me spamming the 2 skill? He like took a second to draw out the weapon, right? If your weapons though, it's basically instant, right? He didn't have to draw out his weapon like that. I actually messed it up, this one. Okay. Let's do it one more time. See, immediately goes into the skill there, right? And you can like get like a few extra auto attacks in this way. If you do this correctly, this is probably like a 400 to 500 DPS increase, so it's noticeable, but it's not so important that you have to really care about it unless you really want to go the extra mile on your Dragonhunter. You don't really have to care about that. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'm afraid this one's a little bit complicated, and this one's a little bit hard to show off without editing the video, right? Which is kind of one of the prerequisites of this video series that I'm doing. I hope you still understood something. I hope you took away how to properly burst. This will take some practice. This is speed dependent. This is a speed dependent rotation again. You're not going to get the perfect lineup for your F1s if you're a little bit slow. Then again, you can leave out the 3 and the 5, and that way maybe you'll get it to work even if you're a tad slower. And then as you practice this, you'll notice that you can do this easier, right? The less you have to focus on the skills, the easier this will be for you, and eventually you'll be able to pull this off in just the same speed, and you'll be able to fit all of these little skills in as well, right? And then you're going to be top DPS in every raid, guys. Every raid, okay? Except Condi bosses, obviously. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped. If you have any more questions, feel free to post them in the comments. Make sure to check out my stream. I'm usually a live streamer more than I'm a video creator, so these guides are kind of like new turf for me. Make sure to leave me some feedback. Tell me what you liked about this video, what you didn't like, so I can improve in the future, hopefully. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.